Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Do I Have Time For This? The series that looks at old and new video games from indie to AAA and everything in between to help you figure out if you've got the time to play, finish, 100% complete a game, or to just leave it in your backlog to forever gather dust. Today we're looking at the recent addition to Hazelight's ever-growing cornucopia of chilled split-screen multiplayer games, Split Fiction. Following on from winning Game of the Year with It Takes Two in 2021, the bar was set insanely high for the next game from Josef Fares' AA studio, and I'm happy to say that they've more or less nailed it here. In Split Fiction, the two players fill the shoes of dual protagonists Mio and Zoe, two writers struggling to get published in the cutthroat world of creative writing. Mio is the snarky, cynical, down-to-earth science fiction writer, whereas Zoe is obsessed with the fantasy setting, her head always up in the clouds and seemingly unaffected by life's problems. They are both introduced to the Machine, an experimental simulation device that lets them live out in real time the stories they've created. However, as you may expect, there's a catch. The shady company CEO Raider is actually using the Machine to steal the ideas of people who get hooked up to it, and after an incident, Mio and Zoe end up sharing one of these simulation experiments. Written as a bit of a character study alongside being a critique on creativity and AI's place in the art space, Split Fiction is also a love letter to gaming in general, which shows in its never-ending bevy of gameplay switch-ups. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the video. It's time to separate fact from fiction with this co-op AA adventure.
This is crazy! Crazy awesome! I don't know! This is not okay! Ooh, that's a mama bird going to feed her chicks! Oops. Mio!
I'll pre-warn you from the get-go, this video is likely to come up very short, as the majority of the joy in this game is found in not knowing what's around the corner, what new and inventive gameplay gimmick is going to shake things up next. As a result, I'm keeping my footage to about the first third of the game, avoiding a lot of the side stories, and when I talk about the gameplay, it'll be in broad strokes just to keep things vague. First off, let's dive into the gameplay. The majority of what's on display in Split Fiction is underpinned by the same basic platforming you had in It Takes Two, where you get a double jump, air dash, and a grappling hook. These all feel way more responsive than in the previous game, and there's even a fairly generous mantle you perform if you're just shy of hitting a ledge, which helps out players who are less skilled at platforming. And that's the main thing I believe Hazelight focused on when creating these worlds, ensuring that there was just the right balance between players who game all the time and the casual gamers who get dragged into the experience by a friend or significant other. Personally, I played with my wife, and we had an absolute blast doing so, but I want to emphasize this wasn't just because I was playing with her.
Phrasing. Shut up!
I think there was actually a reasonable amount of challenge in the game, but this was counterbalanced with a real fine-tuning of the game mechanics and the fact that there was a significantly generous checkpointing system. If one of you dies but the other is still alive, you can mash or hold a button to bring yourself back to life faster, so even if the more casual player dies, the more serious gamer can turn the dial up and survive until the other comes back. And this is what I find the most impressive about the game. The balance has been struck so well that neither player can ever really be bored. There's always something to do. In certain spots, one may platform faster than the other and leave one person waiting, but when it comes to the different powers and mechanics you have throughout the game, there's rarely an instance where Mio is doing something while Zoe sits and watches.
Or vice versa.
Wow, that's a joke that literally one person will get, but I'm leaving it in. Regardless of the situation you're in, whether it be an adrenaline-pumping high-stakes boss fight or chilled platforming section with some cute creatures in the background, you'll constantly be relying on each other to progress and not being overly punished if you happen to mess up. It must have taken so long sat refining these different mechanics to capture this, and it's genuinely one of the strongest parts of the game. I can only praise how well the powers interplay with each other, always offering clever interpretations of what to do with them. Even if there's only ever one solution to a puzzle, it genuinely makes you feel smart when you get that light bulb moment.
Slow? They called you slow! How dare you call me that?
Hey, homie, you still here? Boy, you are slow.
When it comes to the actual levels themselves, they are split into two distinct sections: the main story, which switches between fantasy and sci-fi after a big boss fight, and the side stories. The main story is pretty much foot on the gas all the time, but I don't think it suffers from this brisk pace. In many post-release interviews, Joseph Fares said they spent a lot of time working on the pacing of the game, and it shows here. But it does mean that when it comes to the main story itself, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of breathing room, and you're always being nudged towards the next thing. The side stories though are where the gameplay often gets completely rewritten, where the standard platforming and player actions get completely turned on their head in unique and inventive ways, always for the better. Your characters will be sometimes completely transformed and sent into a totally unique looking world with new art styles, graphics and mechanics that truly let Hazelight flex their gameplay mechanics and creativity. To be honest, I'd take the full game devoid of the actual story and made up entirely of these side stories, where it feels like they couldn't make 30 minutes out of a gameplay section, so they made it a side story to ensure what they'd built still remained in the game. That being said, how does the actual story shape up? Well, you might have been able to guess this based on my intro and the fact that the plot MacGuffin itself is just called The Machine, but ironically, I found the story about the two struggling writers to be the weakest part of the game on the whole. Both myself and my wife figured out almost every plot beat before it happened, and by the end we were saying lines from each of our characters before they even said them. It's that predictable. Without giving anything away, you have the snarky one dealing with the real world and has a lot of anger and doubts based on some trouble she has to deal with, whilst the overly chummy nice character has buried a troubled past, and the fantasy aspects of her character are a way of dealing with it. In all kinds of media, these stories have been done to death, full of tropes and cliché one-liners, then act as if calling these things out as cliché make it alright? I just find it so odd that after the deep subject matter that was tackled in It Takes Two, that of a couple deciding whether or not they should stay together, that Hazelight went to something so rote and played out. It also seems as though the majority of the story centers around Mio. I'm not sure if this was just the sci-fi setting or not, but it felt as though we spent so much more time playing in Mio's stories and talking through her character moments that when we got to Zoe, it just kind of breezed past it until near the end of the game where we got some actual time with her. The overall commentary was also extremely heavy-handed, with the two main characters constantly talking about what art means and the importance of it, whilst having the 2D comic book villain completely losing his mind as the game goes on, without really any reason other than the machine must work or else. Moving on from the story for a bit, let's talk about the actual sci-fi and fantasy worlds themselves, which I found brilliant. Regardless of if it was a side story or a main story area, there was always the right emphasis on the right thing. So a sci-fi level was always focused on scale and bombast, bringing explosions, high-tech weapons and enemies, with a never-ending chase throughout most of it. Alternatively, the fantasy levels were significantly more introspective, allowing you to take in a bit more of the scenery, having cute animals everywhere, and almost all of the powers revolving around animals and nature. I think the design ethos of these two worlds was spot on, and it must have been a drastic undertaking to create both these vastly different worlds that maintain the same character and themes throughout, whilst being completely separate and different from each other. There's also an incredibly cinematic boss battle at the end of almost every sequence, which often take the form of video game references. Far too many to spoil here, and as I say, once it hits you, you realise, oh wait, we're actually playing X game. You'll just have a stupid smile plastered all over your face. The characters themselves in the game are also a marked improvement from the It Takes Two games, showing how iterating on a game engine can truly get the most out of it.
And one of the great things about having a fully dynamic game engine is all of this just works.
And whilst we're on the topic of performance, both on PC and PS5, I don't recall ever having any frame drops, glitches, bugs, or any sort of server issue whatsoever for the entire game at any point. This kind of incredibly polished game should be the norm in gaming, not the anomaly. So let's get down to it. How long does this game take? We played the entire game through once, never skipping a fun mini-game, side story or achievement opportunity, and in total it took us 14 hours. If you're looking to sprint through the main story, skipping sides and fun optional encounters for some reason, you can probably get Split Fiction finished in around 12 hours. For full completion with replaying some chapter specific achievements or following a guide in the first playthrough, you're looking at 15 hours. This is a surprisingly long game considering the entirety of it is a co-op adventure with someone, but it is significantly better paced than It Takes Two, which definitely felt like it dragged by the end. With the generous checkpointing I mentioned earlier, this game definitely lends itself to short playtimes. The only drawback to this is the fact it can't be played solo. meaning your friend or significant other also has to be free to game when you are. It's a hard call to make in that respect, as it's a much better experience if you can devote a few hours a night, but you wouldn't be missing out on too much if you could only manage an hour here and there. There's also a chapter select to go back to any context-specific achievements you may have missed, but with a guide, none of them are particularly hard to get. Also, in a very pro-consumer move, Split Fiction offers a friend pass, along with crossplay. This means you can buy the game on any platform, and whoever you play it with can join you completely free of charge on any platform they choose. When you think this was ultimately published by EA, it's pretty surprising they'd willingly halve their potential revenue, but I think this is just the amount of faith they have in Hazelight's ability to make great games, and it's rightly earned. This game is definitely worth the money. As you probably figured out by the introduction to this video, I fully recommend playing Split Fiction. This game is a love letter to not only art and the process of making it, but a love letter to gaming, bringing together an incredible number of genres and themes to distill itself into the best thing a game can be, pure fun. And yes, my thoughts on the game may be swayed by who I played it with, but that's the beauty of Split Fiction. You have to play it with someone. Nowadays, any game with co-op elements has to balance out the argument of, it's fun with friends but the solo experience suffers. Well, not here. With an intricate level of balance between gameplay features and character abilities, nobody has the time to get bored before you move on to the next thing. It's like the video game equivalent of fast food or TikTok.
Well, you see, when I get bored, I make up my own movie. I have a very short attention span.
But our point is very simple. You see, when...
Oh, look, a bird!
Some may say that's a bad thing, but when you're having this much fun at whirlwind speed, you're not going to stop to notice it. Yes, the story is a bit dull, full of cliches and underdeveloped characters, but in the end, it's all worth it to spend some quality time doing something you love with someone you love. The consumer-friendly friend pass and reasonable price, coupled with the significant length of the game, offers real value for money at a time when new games don't always hit their mark. Don't skip out on this Game of the Year contender, or I promise you will regret it. Do you have time for Split Fiction? On this channel I like to give my thoughts on the game, alongside a bit more of a deep dive on the time you have to invest, so you know what you're getting into, because time is precious, right? If you enjoyed the video or found it useful, feel free to like and share. If you subscribe, I'm looking to put out regular content like this alongside some more in-depth video essays and freeform videos, so stick around, and if you have any more requests on future videos, just drop them in the comments. And finally, if you want to come chat with me, you can find me over on x.com/gracious_rhino. I'm Gracious Rhino, look after each other, and I'll catch you soon.